Chapter 1, 28 hours later. Infection in Los Angeles. The sun had barely broken through the smog when the sirens began. Not the usual Los Angeles symphony of police, ambulances, and freeway rage. These sirens had a lower tone, a vibration that settled in the bones. Emergency broadcast messages rolled across every screen in the city, repeating one chilling phrase: "Shelter in place. Do not attempt to leave the metropolitan area." At first, people thought it was another drill, a glitch, a prank, a Hollywood stunt. But downtown, beneath the rusted overpass of the 101, a convoy of black unmarked trucks had already sealed off entire blocks. Inside one of them, a containment unit hummed, marked Biohazard Division 7. The leak had started only hours ago, deep under the old Los Angeles Biomedical Research Facility, hidden near the LA River. The project had no name, no public record, but the staff called it Project Rebirth, an experiment in neural regeneration meant to reawaken dead tissue. It worked. Too well. Dr. Elaine Mercer, lead virologist, had been the first to notice the anomaly. A test subject, a long-dead primate sample, had begun to breathe again, slow and shallow, yet unmistakable. Her colleagues cheered. Then it opened its eyes. Within minutes, everything went wrong. The sample escaped containment, biting through a researcher's wrist before collapsing. The wound festered black, veins bulging like worms beneath the skin. Security footage showed the infected man rising again in under 8 minutes. The lab's automated lockdown failed when a panicked scientist entered the wrong code. By dawn, the infection had spread through the lab's air ducts, carried by microspores, a failed neural binder that jumped from blood to air to skin. It wasn't just a virus. It was parasitic intelligence, learning, adapting, replicating. Now, outside, the city was waking up, oblivious. A jogger along Echo Park noticed a staggering man from an alley, covered in sores, gasping like a fish out of water. When she called out to him, his head snapped up, and in a single blur of movement, he was on her. The sound that followed was not human. By 9 a.m., the first emergency calls flooded dispatch. Man biting people on Sunset Boulevard. Attack at Union Station, multiple victims. They don't stop moving, even when shot. Inside the LAPD control room, monitors glowed with chaos. Helicopter feeds showed intersections blocked by overturned cars, civilians running in every direction. The mayor's voice cracked over the radio. "We are declaring a full state of emergency and activating National Guard units in Los Angeles County." But it was already too late. The infection didn't behave like any known pathogen. The parasitic spores were airborne, microscopic, invisible, yet heavy enough to cling to dust and moisture. As the Santa Ana winds picked up, they carried the infection westward, across the hills, down toward the ocean. At 3 p.m., a news helicopter captured something horrifying. Hundreds of figures moving in perfect, synchronized rhythm through the streets of Hollywood. They weren't just running. They were hunting. Their eyes were filmed white, but their coordination impossible. They moved as though guided by one mind. The internet called it the LA Hive. Live streams exploded, trending hashtags. But within 28 hours, Los Angeles had fallen silent. Dr. Mercer survived, barely. Hidden in an underground maintenance tunnel beneath the facility, she recorded one final transmission. This isn't viral. It's behavioral. It's not spreading by accident. It's searching for something. A signal. If anyone's hearing this. Project Rebirth was a military prototype. We tried to weaponize neuroregeneration. It adapted, and now it's awake. Static, then silence. Above ground, the city lights flickered out of one district at a time. The Hollywood sign glowed faintly against the smoke-filled sky, the last symbol of civilization before the night consumed it. And in the darkness, the infected began to whisper, not words, but echoes, as though something inside them remembered being human. The infection had only begun its journey north. Chapter 2, Train to Yosemite, the infected ride north. The station loudspeakers at Union Station, Los Angeles, were still playing their automated announcement loop. The next Amtrak service to San Francisco departs in 20 minutes. But no one was there to hear it, except for the faint scraping of nails along the tiled floor, and the whisper of infected lungs echoing through the cavernous hall. A week earlier, this place was full of travelers. Now, luggage lay open, spilled across benches. Phones buzzed endlessly. A single service light flickered red near Platform 9, where the last survivors of the city huddled, waiting for a train that might never come. Among them was Ethan Rourke, a retired park ranger from Yosemite Valley who'd come south for a medical appointment. He'd been trying to call his daughter, Maya, stuck near Fresno. The lines were dead. The only thing working was an emergency radio channel, broadcasting a single repeating message. Evacuation train departing Union Station, northbound route secured through the Central Valley. Limited capacity. The crowd at the platform, maybe 20 people, stood silent as the train screeched into view. It wasn't the usual Amtrak. This one was armored, windows sealed, exterior scarred with bullet holes and soot. The doors opened with a hiss, and soldiers in hazmat suits waved them in, rifles trembling. Inside, the air smelled of disinfectant and fear. Every seat was taken by someone who had seen too much, mothers clutching children, an injured firefighter whispering prayers, an old man staring blankly at the floor. Ethan sat near the window, gripping his duffel bag, his hand trembling around the radio. "Yosemite's safe, right?" a woman beside him asked. He hesitated. It was 2 days ago. The train rumbled northward, through Burbank, Santa Clarita, and into the vast openness of the Central Valley. The sun burned orange over fields of withering crops. Every town they passed looked deserted, streets choked with abandoned cars and signs of chaos. Then, around Bakersfield, the radio crackled. "Containment breach in Fresno. Repeat, containment breach in Fresno. Do not stop." Static swallowed the rest. The soldier at the door cursed under his breath. "We're not stopping until Merced. Everyone stay calm." But calm was impossible. The infected didn't need permission to move north. Just before midnight, the train slowed unexpectedly. Lights flickered. The sound of metal grinding echoed through the car. Ethan peered out the window and froze. The next overpass was covered in figures. Dozens of them, pale, twitching, mouths stretched open in silent screams. They dropped from the bridge like shadows, slamming onto the roof of the train. Screams erupted. The soldiers fired through the ceiling, but it was no use. The infected were faster, smarter. They'd learned to follow vibrations. One of them tore open the emergency hatch and dropped inside, snapping at anything that moved. Chaos. Gunfire. Blood. The train lurched violently, throwing passengers into the aisles. The infected moved like lightning, not mindless, but coordinated. They tore through compartments with inhuman precision, eyes burning like molten glass. Ethan grabbed the old woman beside him and pulled her under the seats. He could smell the infection, metallic, fungal, something ancient and new all at once. The soldier at the far end screamed into his radio. "We've got parasitic coordination. They're learning from each other." Static, then silence. As the train sped through Merced County, the few survivors retreated into the rear car, barricading the doors with luggage and metal rods. The infected pounded from the other side, a wall of claws and teeth. Ethan looked out the back window. The darkness of California stretched endlessly, and far beyond, faint blue lights flickered on the horizon. A military quarantine zone, maybe Yosemite base camp. "If we can reach there," Ethan said, "we might have a chance." The others looked at him, desperate, hopeless. "You work there, right?" someone asked. He nodded. They had bunkers, cold storage, and something else. Experimental containment systems for wildlife diseases. The woman from earlier whispered, "Do you think they knew about this before it happened?" Ethan didn't answer. Outside, the night air shimmered, dust and spores glowing faintly, like embers drifting from invisible fire. The infected had evolved again. Now, they traveled on the wind. By dawn, the train passed through Modesto. The remaining passengers, less than 10, watched the sunrise through bullet-pocked glass. Smoke rose in every direction. They had escaped Los Angeles, but California itself was no longer safe. Ethan checked his radio again. The signal was faint, but there. Yosemite Outpost, holding survivors. Coordinates. Mariposa Grove. He exhaled slowly. The park was still breathing. But behind the train, miles of infected swarmed the tracks, hundreds of them, running in eerie silence, eyes reflecting the dawn. And among them, a figure unlike the rest, tall, calm, with veins glowing faint blue beneath its skin. It turned toward the train and began to follow. The infection had a leader now. Chapter 3, Night of the Golden Gate Dead. The fog rolled in thick and heavy over the bay, swallowing the skyline in slow, suffocating waves. From a distance, San Francisco looked peaceful, the Golden Gate Bridge glowing faintly beneath the mist, like a ghostly ribcage stretching across dark water. But as the evacuation train screeched into the terminal at Emeryville, that illusion shattered. The cars were half empty, streaked with blood and ash. Ethan stepped out first, clutching the old woman's trembling hand. The air here was colder, dense with a strange metallic taste, like burnt ozone. Somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed and then died. No human voices followed. "God," someone muttered behind him. "It's gone." The skyline flickered, the once bustling city now a field of dying embers. Streets that should have been choked with traffic lay abandoned. Cars turned sideways, their alarms long out of power. Ethan turned his radio on. Only static. Then, faintly, a female voice. "Golden Gate containment perimeter breached. Repeat. Breach confirmed. Evacuation suspended." The soldiers who had survived the train ride looked at each other in silence. None of them spoke. They started walking north, past Jack London Square, through streets coated in a fine layer of white dust that wasn't quite ash. It clung to their boots, rising like tiny spores. By the time they reached Market Street, the city had begun to move. Not the wind, not animals, something else. A scraping sound, the kind of slow, dragging motion that didn't belong to the living. And then, one by one, shapes began to emerge from the fog. People, or what used to be people. Their eyes glowed faint blue, veins pulsing like trapped lightning beneath thin, colorless skin. Some still wore work badges and uniforms. One woman had a bouquet of dead flowers clutched in her hand, her mouth twisted open in a silent scream. "They're everywhere," whispered the woman beside Ethan. "No," he said quietly. "They're waking up." By midnight, Union Square was a graveyard of noise. The infected screamed from rooftops, echoing down alleyways. Ethan led the survivors into a hotel lobby that looked like it had been frozen mid-evacuation, luggage scattered, half-eaten meals still on tables, TVs looping emergency broadcasts of evacuation routes that no longer existed. Inside, they found a survivor, a man in a blood-stained lab coat, sitting behind the reception desk with a revolver in his lap. His eyes were hollow, like he hadn't slept in days. "You're from Yosemite?" the man croaked. Ethan nodded slowly. "I was. What's happening here?" The scientist looked toward the cracked ceiling, where a low hum could be heard, something electrical. They said it was a parasite, something engineered. But it wasn't supposed to be airborne. It wasn't supposed to think. He smiled faintly, a mad, broken grin. "They lied to all of us." The others shifted uneasily. "What do you mean, think?" Ethan asked. The man leaned forward. "They're connected. Every one of them. A neural lattice. When one learns, all of them adapt." Before anyone could respond, a deep rumbling shook the ground. The lights flickered, then died. Screams erupted outside. A sound like thunder, but sharper, closer. "What the hell was that?" someone shouted. Ethan rushed to the window and saw it. The Golden Gate Bridge, burning in the distance. Its cables snapped like veins under pressure. Dozens of infected were crawling along the span, glowing like embers through the smoke. The firelight made them look almost beautiful, if not for the horror that followed. Helicopters circled overhead, dropping canisters into the water. Blue fire erupted, chemical containment. It was too late. The infection had already crossed. They fled the hotel as the first wave hit downtown. The infected moved faster now, almost sprinting. Their screams were sharper, synchronized, echoing like sonar. Ethan led the group toward the ferry building, hoping to find a boat. But the pier was chaos, overturned cars, shredded metal, and hundreds of infected writhing in the fog. He stopped dead in his tracks. Among them, near the water's edge, stood it, the one from the train tracks. Taller than the rest, calm amidst the frenzy, its chest pulsing with faint light. It turned its head toward Ethan and smiled. "That's impossible," he whispered. The leader moved forward slowly, deliberately, its motions fluid like a serpent. Every infected around it stilled, as if waiting for command. Then it raised its hand, and they came alive again, all at once. The group ran. Through the streets, through fire and glass and smoke. The sound of footsteps followed them, hundreds of feet slapping wet pavement, closing in. They made it to the pier, but the ferries were gone. Only wreckage and floating debris remained. Ethan spotted an old patrol boat half-submerged near the dock. He and two others waded through the freezing water, pushing it free. "Get in," he shouted. Bullets whizzed through the air, soldiers on a nearby rooftop, trying to hold the infected back. One of them yelled, "Get out of the city. Head north," before being dragged into the dark. As the boat drifted away, the survivors watched San Francisco dissolve into flame and fog behind them. The Golden Gate Bridge collapsed in a wave of molten steel. And across the bay, a dozen more fires burned: Oakland, Berkeley, Marin. Ethan sat at the bow, soaked, shaking, his radio clutched to his chest. He tuned the dial until he found a signal, faint but there. "Yosemite, safe zone. Repeat, survivors head east through Route 140. He looked up toward the mountains, a faint outline in the dawn haze. That was their destination, their last chance. But as the sun began to rise, he noticed something drifting across the water, tiny motes of blue light, glowing softly, like dust in the air. He touched one. It sizzled on contact. The infection had reached the bay, and the wind was blowing inland. Chapter 4, Zombieland, Mojave Exile. The Mojave looked endless. Miles of scorched sand stretching beneath a dying sun. The sky turns in orange and rust. Wind howled across the dunes like a scream caught in a jar. Ethan wiped the sweat from his forehead. The ocean behind them was gone now, just a memory of smoke and ruin. The patrol boat had carried them inland until the water ran shallow. Then they'd walked. For hours, maybe days. Time meant nothing anymore. There were only 5 left. 5 survivors who'd escaped the fall of San Francisco. Their truck, an old military supply vehicle, rattled across a dry highway that cut through the Mojave Desert, its tires spitting dust and shards of glass from the long-abandoned freeway. Every so often, Ethan would see road signs bleached by the sun. Barstow, 72 miles. Las Vegas, 157. But there were no towns anymore. Just silence. "How long do you think before we find anyone?" one of the men asked. Ethan stared out the cracked windshield. If the broadcast was real, Yosemite might still have a camp. If not, the sentence didn't need finishing. The woman beside him, a journalist named Claire, adjusted the radio again, static washing over her voice. "The signal's gone weaker since yesterday. Could be interference, or we're the only ones left," said another voice from the back. Nobody laughed. They stopped at a gas station off the highway. It looked like it had been frozen in time. A single rusted sign swinging in the wind, half the letters missing. LS Gas. The pumps were long dry. Inside, shelves were overturned. Cans of food scattered across the floor. The smell hit them instantly. Decay, old oil, something metallic. "Careful," Ethan warned. "Check every corner." They moved through the aisles, flashlights cutting through the dim light. A few dried blood smears on the counter. Old, weeks maybe. Then a sound, a faint scraping. From the back, Ethan raised his pistol and crept forward. He peered around the storage door and froze. A man sat against the wall, his body sunburned and dehydrated, eyes glowing faint blue beneath cracked lids. His chest moved, barely. He wasn't fully turned. Not yet. "Help me," he rasped. The others surrounded him. Claire knelt beside him, checking his pulse. "He's infected but slow. Could be dormant." The man grabbed her wrist. "They hear through the sand." "What?" "They're under it. They crawl beneath." Then he convulsed, hard. His back arched, mouth open, a scream tearing through his chest like static feedback. His veins lit up, bright blue, and then burst, spraying the wall. They fired. Once. Twice. The echo vanished into the desert. Ethan turned to Claire. "We move. Now." That night, they set up camp near a collapsed radio tower. The desert was unnaturally still. The only sound was wind sliding through twisted metal. Ethan sat awake by the fire, the flames reflecting in his tired eyes. Something about what the man said kept echoing in his mind. They crawl beneath. At first, he thought it was just paranoia. But then, the sand shifted. Just slightly. A ripple moved across the ground, slow and deliberate, like something tunneling underneath. The firelight flickered. Claire waked the others. The sand bulged, then burst open. A hand, gray and skeletal, shot out, clawing at the air. then another, then 5, then dozens. They erupted like insects from a nest, howling, their skin cracked from the dry heat. Their mouths dripped a black resin instead of blood. "Run!" Ethan shouted. They scrambled up the ridge, firing as they climbed. The bullets only slowed them down. The infected didn't bleed like before. The heat had mutated them. Their flesh had hardened, like armor. Claire threw a flare. It hissed and burned bright red. The creatures screamed and recoiled, their eyes bursting under the sudden light. They hate the light. Ethan grabbed the flare gun, firing another into the dunes. A chain of explosions lit the horizon like lightning. But the desert wasn't empty anymore. The sand was alive, moving. Thousands of ripples racing toward them from every direction. They reached an old airfield just before dawn. The hangars stood silent, wings of old planes jutting out like bones. They barricaded the doors with scrap metal and collapsed crates. Inside, they found something unexpected, a biohazard container with the U.S. Department of Defense seal. The label was scorched, but a few words remained. Project Seraphim, Bioweapon Test 03/Hostility Control Failure. Ethan stared at it in disbelief. So this is where it started. Claire knelt beside the case. It was empty, except for a shattered glass vial, glowing faint blue in the dark. They were experimenting out here, she whispered. The infection didn't spread by accident. It was released. The others stood in stunned silence. A sound echoed from outside, deep, rhythmic, like footsteps, heavy ones. "They found us," Ethan said. The hangar doors began to rattle, metal bending under pressure. Then a thud, then another. Dust fell from the ceiling. One of the survivors aimed at the door. How many? The answer came as the wall exploded inward, sand and metal flying in every direction. A creature stepped through, taller than any infected they'd seen. Its skin glowed faintly beneath the dust, veins throbbing like molten glass. Its jaw was split open into 4 parts, its tongue writhing like something separate, alive. It didn't run. It studied them. "It's one of the first," Claire said. "Patient 0. Ethan fired, but the bullets ricocheted off his chest. The creature moved, fast, unnatural. It grabbed one of the men and crushed him like paper. The survivors scattered, flames catching on spilled fuel. The hangar erupted into chaos. Ethan Claire pulled through a side door just as the fuel tanks ignited, a blinding flash that turned night into dawn. The explosion echoed for miles across the desert. When they finally stopped running, the air smelled like smoke and burning flesh. The horizon glowed orange behind them. They were down to 3 now. The radio crackled faintly. A voice, broken, weak. "This is Yosemite Base, survivors. Head north along Route 395. Do not stop." Ethan looked at Claire. Her face was streaked with ash, her eyes hollow. "We're not dying out here," he said. "No," she whispered. "But I think California already has it." They turned toward the mountains. The infection wasn't behind them anymore. It was ahead, waiting. Chapter 5, Dawn of the Pacific, the last broadcast. The Pacific roared like it had swallowed the world. Ethan stood on the shoreline of what used to be Monterey Bay, where salt water met the ruins of the coast highway. The waves glowed faintly blue under the dawn, not with sunlight, but with infection. Beside him, Claire adjusted the portable transmitter strapped to her chest. The radio sputtered between static and dying voices. "Signals breaking, try higher ground," she whispered, her voice brittle from days without sleep. They had been walking for 3 days since the explosion in Mojave. The others were gone. The fuel was gone. Even the will to hope felt foreign now. But the signal, that broken voice from Yosemite base, still flickered like a dying candle. It was the last thread of purpose they had left. The coastline was unrecognizable. Houses half submerged, palm trees turned to skeletons. The sky hung heavy with red mist drifting from burned cities to the north. "Claire," Ethan said quietly, "you ever think the ocean's too quiet?" She didn't look at him. "It's waiting." He frowned. "For what?" "For us to join it." They climbed what used to be a lifeguard station, now surrounded by blackened sand. Ethan adjusted the radio dish, pointing it toward the open sea. The transmitter whined and spat static. Then a voice. "Repeat. Pacific Command, evacuation failed, contamination level rising." The sound faded, replaced by another, fainter, slower, like someone whispering through water. "They're in the tide." Claire's eyes widened. "Rewind that." He twisted the dial. The words came again, overlapping with the hiss of waves. "Infection has adapted, airborne particles, transferring through evaporation." The realization hit them both at once. The infection wasn't spreading by touch anymore. It was in the air, in the rain, in the ocean mist. "Jesus Christ," Ethan murmured. The horizon shimmered strangely, dark patches moving beneath the surface. It looked almost like shadows of whales until one surfaced. A shape broke through the water, bloated, humanoid, with eyes glowing faint turquoise. Its mouth opened unnaturally wide, letting out a low, bubbling moan. Then another appeared beside it. Then 5 more. The sea itself was waking up. Night fell faster than it should have. The fog rolled in thick and heavy, glowing faint blue from within. Claire sat against the wooden railing, her voice shaking as she read the last entry from her notebook, her broadcast log. Entry 57, October 23rd. "We made it to the coast. No safe zones remain inland. The air tastes metallic. The infection hums when it rains. Ethan says we'll try one final broadcast at dawn." She closed the notebook. "If anyone hears this," she whispered, "they'll know California's gone." Ethan looked out over the ocean. "Then let's make sure they remember how it went." He powered up the transmitter. The radio light flickered weakly, red to orange to blue. A single tone echoed through the fog. "This is Ethan Rowe, survivor of California Biohazard Event 07. If you're hearing this, stay away from the coast." The infection, the sound of the waves cut him off. They weren't waves anymore. They were voices. Thousands of faint, whispering tones rising from the water like a choir of the drowned. Then something moved beneath the pier. Boards cracked. The whole structure shuddered. Claire grabbed his arm. "They're under us." A hand burst through the floorboards, pale, webbed, slick with algae. Another followed. Then dozens. The infected were crawling out of the tide. Ethan pulled Claire toward the ladder, firing down into the shadows. The bullets hit flesh, but didn't stop the movement. The creatures hissed, screeched, sounds between human and marine. They reached the beach just as the tower collapsed behind them, swallowed by glowing surf. "We need higher ground," Claire gasped. Ethan pointed toward the cliffside lighthouse that still flickered faintly above the fog. "There." They ran. The infected followed, crawling across the sand in swarms, eyes glowing like underwater lanterns. Their skin shimmered with scales now, the infection blending with something reptilian. By the time they reached the lighthouse, the sky was pale gray, Dawn struggling to rise through the haze. Inside, the spiral staircase creaked with every step. The air reeked of salt and rot. At the top, the lantern glass was cracked but functional. Claire set the transmitter down beside it, her hands trembling as she tuned it again. "If this gets through," she said, "maybe someone offshore will hear it." Ethan stared through the window. The Pacific was glowing brighter now, veins of blue light stretching across the waves like roots. He could see shapes beneath the surface, massive, shifting, ancient. "It's not just the infection," he said quietly. "It's something older, something that used the virus to wake up." Claire glanced at him. "You mean, we were never alone here?" The water churned violently. A low rumble shook the tower. Outside, the horizon split open, a vast shadow rising from the depths. For a second, it looked like a mountain. Then it moved. An eye, larger than the lighthouse itself, opened beneath the waves, glowing with the same turquoise hue. The infected below screamed as if in worship. "Ethan, what is that?" He didn't answer. He just stared. The radio flickered again, one final burst of clarity. "This is Pacific Command. To any survivors along the West Coast. Do not approach the ocean. Repeat, do not." Static swallowed the voice. Then, for a heartbeat, silence. And then, a new sound. A deep, resonant hum coming not from the transmitter, but from the ocean itself. The light in the tower went out. Claire screamed as the glass shattered inward, water pouring through the window though the tide was still 100 feet below. The infection had become vapor, glowing mist that crept inside and wrapped around their skin like breath. Ethan felt it burn his lungs. He stumbled toward the console, his hands shaking. "Broadcast it." He choked. "Let them know." Claire pressed the mic, her voice cracking through tears. "This is the last broadcast from California. The ocean is alive. Do not follow the light." The mist swallowed her words. The static grew louder until it became the only sound left in the world. Outside, the Pacific glowed fully blue now, a mirror of light and decay. The infection had found its final vessel. Not land, not air, but water. And as dawn broke over the ruined coast, the light didn't rise from the sun, it rose from beneath the waves.